Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to my new video and new channel as well. So this is part 2 of my video for today. Part 1 is on my old channel, so you're welcome to go back and watch that one. I will be uploading it on here as well, so keep an eye out for that. I'm doing part 1s on my old channel and part 2 on my new channel, mainly because not everyone has moved across, so I'm trying to get people to come over to the new channel, and this is probably the best way to do it, to do part 1 part 2 videos. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe, guys, and try and watch the video to the end. It really helps the algorithm. So in part 2 I'm going to be talking about China, and especially what you see here. China has released its first quantum computer with a dual core breakthrough, and it's the first country in the world to do so. Not only is China releasing a quantum computer, this is the second generation. It's called the Haiyan 2, the first dual core atomic quantum computer. They did release a quantum computer not long ago called the Haiyan 1, which was the first generation, but this is the second generation. It is a dual core, like they say, and it is much faster as well. It's jointly developed by Chinese Academy of Science, Wuhan University, and Huazhong University of Science and Technology, Wuhan Institute of Quantum Technology, and other top research team. So the most important thing from this breakthrough is not just the fact that China has released its quantum computer. The most important factor for this is the fact that China has developed it all in-house and all with local products. So local engineers, this is the picture of it. They've used local engineers, local products, their own semiconductors, their own, quantum hardware, software. Everything you see is all done in China, and that's the extraordinary thing about it. So if United States builds a quantum computer in the United States, not every part comes from the United States, by the way. So they might buy the chip from TSMC from the island of Taiwan, for example. They might buy the RAM or the hard disk from Samsung in South Korea. They might buy the cooling system from China. They might need the rare earth minerals from China. Do you know what I'm trying to say? I'm trying to say that United States does not have a locally sourced production. They do not make everything in-house. It's a supply chain that they use from the rest of the world. China is the only country that has got its own supply chain. So if China gets cut off from the rest of the world, if United States decides to sanction China like they did to Russia, for example, China will not be affected because they are in charge of their own supply chain, so they can build all of these machines themselves. They don't need, products or help from the West. So this way, China is pretty much sanction proof, and if there is a war in the future with the United States, they don't have to rely on America or the West for anything. They can pretty much do everything themselves, build computers, build weapons, build their own, have their own manufacturing without the need for Western products. So that's the whole goal, basically. China is pretty much self-sufficient. So it's a huge breakthrough, guys. Also in terms of computing and technology. Quantum is the next big thing. They're saying that, don't quote. This is what people are saying. People are saying that even Bitcoin might not be safe with quantum computers coming out. Because quantum computers, they are billions, if not trillion times faster than conventional computers, and they can do calculations, much faster than the old style computers, because those of you who know quantum computing, they use something called qubits, and qubits are a lot more faster than the old binary stuff that you get from the old computers. So you can do calculations billion times, even trillion times faster, even more, even quadrillion times even. So there's people are saying that even Bitcoin might not be safe, because these quantum computers can find out the seed code. Those of you who use Bitcoin and crypto, you know that when you have a wallet, you create a seed code with like 12 words, or maybe not 12 words, but more than 12 sometimes, maybe 16 or maybe 24. So you basically put all these words, and for you to randomly come up with all these words is almost impossible. The odds of you coming up with all these words is almost like almost trillions to one, basically. But with quantum computing, they're saying that they can work out seed words very, very quickly. It's not going to take that long. But this only affects if your wallet is online. For example, if you have a hot wallet, and then you are in trouble. A hot wallet is a wallet that you have online, say in an exchange or something like that, or on the internet. But if you have a cold wallet where you are offline, then you're pretty much safe. Only if you come online, then you might be in a bit trouble. But anyway, the whole point is these quantum computers are extremely, extremely fast, much, much faster than conventional computers. And imagine what you can do with that. Imagine all, there are, I know the old computers, for example, if you've got a huge amounts of data, it takes a long time to go over the data. And I can give you an example. For example, SETI, for example. If you're looking at the universe and you have a huge amounts of data to analyze, you want to analyze all of the planets and all the stars, and you want to map out the universe from using your telescope, for example. That's a huge amount of data, and to use conventional computers to analyze all of that data, it will take you hundreds and hundreds of years. But these quantum computers can do it in minutes, even seconds, even. Huge amounts of computing power, guys, huge amounts. And China is really big on big data, and big data is, exactly what it is. It's a lot of data. People don't know this, but one of China's strength is data, because they've got 1.4 billion people. They all use apps. They're all online. And not only that, China also has data from other countries as well. That's those ones are part of the Belt and Road, for example. There's a digital component of Belt and Road where digital payments go through, and again you have to go through huge amounts of data there, and you're using other countries' data. Plus, China is expanding to other parts of the world. They are the biggest exporters of the world. So Chinese companies are expanding to other parts of the world. So again, they're getting data from working in those countries. And I'm not talking about spying here. That's a completely different thing. When you're a company working abroad, you're going to have that data, right? You're going to have a database of your suppliers, your accounts, all the work that you're doing. You're going to have to keep it all into a database. All of that data needs to go to the head office in China. So you see, that's how information works. From information moves from one company to another country and vice versa. And obviously there's laws in each country, certain privacy laws. Obviously you cannot break them. There's certain user laws. You cannot be taking people's data without their authorization and stuff like that. But this is why when China or any other company works in a different country, they have to follow the local rules and regulations. And one of the rules in Europe is, if you trade in Europe, you're going to have a data center which keeps all user information locally. So you're not taking any user information to China, for example. So all the user data stays local. And that's a strict policy in Europe, and even in America, and even China has that as well. So if there's a foreign company wants to trade in China, they have to keep that data within China, the user data, I mean. But any other data they can take. These are like any other data which doesn't have the user data, for example. I mean, that's theirs to do as they please. So data is like the new oil, guys, especially for AI. AI is basically food. The food for AI is data. Without data, AI is useless, absolutely useless. If you have no data, then what is AI going to use? If you cannot use any data, then your AI is going to be extremely, extremely dumb. It's called dumb AI, basically, if there's no data, because there's nothing to analyze. If you're a human and you go through life on easy mode, you don't have any experience, you don't have any skills, you don't have any, you don't know what's right from wrong, you are pretty much going to be a useless human, because you have no life experience whatsoever, and that's not going to help you in life. If you have any problems, normally it's your experience that gets you through in life. Same way with AI. AI learns from its mistakes, and it does all these computations and algorithms, and it basically goes through the best channel and best decision making based on the data that it's got. So data is like gold, especially in this day and age. And AI, the best AI in the world is the one that has got access to huge amounts of data. The more data you have, the more you can analyze, and a better decision that you can make based on that data. For example, guys, if you are running a business and you have hundreds of suppliers, and you basically want to pick one supplier out of your hundreds, you don't want to be dealing with so many suppliers, you just want to deal with one supplier. So you create an AI code, AI agent, or you basically write a quick piece of AI code, and you basically ask a question: can you pick my best supplier based on how reliable they are, what products they have, what products I need, how good they are in communication and support, how good they are in terms of pricing compared to the others. So you basically put some list of rules and regulations that you are looking for, and your AI will basically scan all the data from all of your suppliers, and it will come back with the best answer, and it will say supplier B is your best solution based on all of your requirements. So AI basically does all of that for you. It's very, very powerful if it's used the right way. And I say that people don't realize this, but China is way, way ahead of United States when it comes to AI. Huge advantage. People in the West think that America and China is neck and neck. They're exactly the same. No, guys, no, 100% not. 100% China is way, way ahead of United States. You just have to look at Chinese technology, and even like the new DeepSeek version which has come out. They have basically put the source code online, and that just shows that Chinese companies are not really looking for profit. They just want to basically better human society. They're doing it for humanity, to improve lives. So that's why they kind of put the source code out there on the internet. But as an example, those of you who kind of look at Chinese AI, I mean, I look at it a lot as well. There's a program called Dance 2.0, And Seedance 2.0 is closest thing to making your own movies. You can just say a prompt, you can just say a quick prompt like, can you make me a 5-minute movie of Superman and Incredible Hulk fighting each other? You can just do something like that, and it will create a 5-minute video of Superman and Hulk fighting each other. And it's amazing. It's so realistic. It's really, really difficult to tell real from, with AI nowadays. And with Seedance version 2.0, it creates your own. You can create your own AI models, which are very, very difficult to tell from the real person. They even have like blemishes and crooked teeth and things like that. They think of everything. It's just like so good nowadays. And nowadays, a lot of people online on social media, they use a lot of these Chinese AI companies to make fake profiles. So you see a lot of men creating females online. So nowadays on TikTok, you don't know whether you're, watching a man behind an AI or a real female. It's very, very difficult to tell. Before you could have told, 1 year ago, it's quite easy to tell if it's AI or not. But now it's really, really difficult. And all the best AI companies are actually coming from China, like Seedance and obviously the new version of DeepSeek. Many other AI companies all over the internet. Most of them are like Chinese, so they've pretty much taken over, guys. But one advantage, China has, obviously, I said about the data. China has way more data than United States when it comes to AI. But also, China has a huge advantage with energy as well. China produces more energy than the rest of the world combined. So if United States, Europe, Africa, Middle East, they all join together, still China produces more energy than all of them together. And it's still rising. China's energy comes from so many sources, from wind, solar, coal, hydroelectric, nuclear, wind. There's so many oil and gas. There's so many sources of energy that China is using to produce all of that energy, and all of those energy is used, with these top AI data centers, and they're used to fire up amazing cities and all the lights in the night as all the buildings start shining. But also they're used for the industry as well. And everything, the more energy you have, the better it is your life is going to be. Everything just works better. For example, the more energy you have, you can have for example, in the summer you can have air conditioning, and it's not going to be that expensive. So energy can be quite cheap, even if you have air conditioning running all day, all night. Things like that. Plus, if you have data centers, they're not as expensive as compared to if you create these data centers in the United States. It'll be much cheaper in China because energy is more abundant. So these data centers can run without running, without having any shutdowns or power outages. So there's huge advantages having power, guys. There's so many things you can do with it. You can have all these EV cars, charging points with all that energy. So, if you have surplus energy, you can do so much with that. There's a lot you can do. China is also building lots of pumping stations. So, they can save energy. But the problem with renewables, you cannot save that much energy with renewables. But there is a way where China produces pumping stations where you basically pump water to a higher point on top of a mountain if you have a lot of energy, and then when you need energy you just dump that water back into a lower reservoir, and that obviously produces energy. So you can save energies in that method, and China has a huge amounts of these water pumping stations and reservoirs to kind of to save energy and generate energy. So they're investing a lot of money into that, basically. So yeah, definitely China is having a huge advantage when it comes to quantum AI and stuff like that. The only disadvantage China has is they're still not caught up with the West when it comes to EUVs, and EUVs are very much catching up with the rest of the world. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the latest EV news. So ASML has released this new EUV machine, and it's very, very expensive. I think it works out 400 to 500 million for just one machine. And TSMC has refused to buy them. So basically ASML has no buyers. Well, they have some buyers from Intel, but their main customer used to be TSMC. Also Samsung as well. Samsung is not really buying that much ASML's products. And ASML is basically sanctioned China because America has told ASML to do it. If they didn't sanction China, then China would have gladly bought these machines, no problem. But TSMC has refused to buy these latest ASML machines, so they're basically gathering dust. And the reason TSMC is not buying it, because TSMC is actually losing money. And I'm going to get to that shortly. But TSMC, used to be like selling all the high-end chips, but they used to sell all the low-end chips as well to the world. But now China has actually taken over that low-end chip market. So instead of people buying the low-end chips from TSMC, now they're buying it from China. So TSMC is actually not making that much money as a company. They used to make huge amounts, but not now. Chinese companies are taking over the market share when it comes to mature chips. And I'll show you an example a little bit later on. But also TSMC has everything it needs when it comes to making the high-end chips, and they don't want to keep buying brand new machines every single year and spend, if each machine costs around 400 million and you buy, let's say, 100 machines, can you see the costs? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. It's just not worth it, guys. Every single year or every single few years, it's just not worth it, putting that much investment into buying machines. So this is why TSMC has not been buying the latest EUV machines from ASML. There's just not a market for them anymore. So ASML basically have stopped selling EUV and DUV machines to China. But before the ban came into effect, China bought huge amounts of DUV machines. And the Dutch media are saying that basically China stockpiled on DUV machines before the ban. And the ban came out before, I think when Trump came in for the second term, he immediately banned China from buying the DUV machines. This was last year. So China's got a huge basically stockpile of these machines that they bought from ASML before the ban took place. And a lot of these machines have been bought by Huawei and also by SMIC. And with that, they have basically built all these new factories all over China. Huawei's been building 2-3 factories a year for semiconductors, same with SMIC. And they've had huge amounts of backing from the Chinese government as well. And so basically, China has been focusing on mature nodes, and mature nodes are 28 nanometers and above, basically. And they're also mass producing 7 nanometers as well. You can see SMIC, they're mass producing 7 nanometers. And recently, Huawei has been buying huge amounts of these 7 nanometers from some SMIC and using them on latest Huawei gadgets like phones, laptops, and even the new Huawei chips are using the SMIC 7 nanometers. So the next article I wanted to show you is this. China's semiconductor exports reached 43.3 billion. That's 72% increase year on year. And can you imagine, in the first term for Trump, when Trump placed all these sanctions on China, can you guess how much semiconductor exports were coming out of China? I'll give you a wild guess, guys, but most of you will get it right. It was zero, absolutely zero, because China wasn't exporting any chips at that point. Then Trump came in and placed all these sanctions on China, and China was forced to kickstart its semiconductor kind of supply chain because of Trump sanctions. So now China is basically selling 43.3 billion per year, and that's a 72% increase year on year. So when China sells all these and these are mature nodes, by the way, maybe 28 nanometers, sometimes 7 nanometers. And so when China sells all these mature nodes into the market, they are taking market share from the West. So they're taking market share away from Intel, Samsung, and especially TSMC. So while before, the West and TSMC, Samsung used to have full market share for semiconductors and chips, now China is starting to take market share away from them. And this is why they didn't want China to have a semiconductor industry. That's why they placed all these sanctions on China, because they did not want to lose that market share to China. And this is mature chips, by the way. And those of you who know mature chips, you don't really need the high-end chips for everyday products like televisions, EV cars, even laptops. Well, you might need it for laptops, but not the low-end laptops. And things like fridges, refrigerators, and everyday products. You don't need the high-end stuff. And also, the rest of the world doesn't really need the high-end chips, because the rest of the world is not a big manufacturing, they don't have a big manufacturing sector like China does. So, where iPhones, all the high-end manufacturing, like iPhones, for example, is made in China. And so other high-end products are obviously made in the United States, and obviously TSMC in the island of Taiwan, and also in South Korea with Samsung. But most of the high-end manufacturing happens in China. China is the leading manufacturing country in the world, by a huge number. Everything gets made in China. So they are pretty much the factory of the world. So the rest of the world doesn't really have that big manufacturing capacity like China does. So they don't really need the high-end chips. So they might have a low-end manufacturing capacity in their own countries, and they buy the high-end stuff from China or America or even South Korea or the island of Taiwan even. And sometimes even India's got a small manufacturing capacity as well. So the point I'm trying to make is, when China sells these chips to the global south, global south is not really looking for high-end chips. They don't, and they buy the low-end stuff because that's what they need for their country, for their low-end manufacturing. And also they're cheap as well, and they're reliable. So because when China makes these mature chips, they are pretty much reliable. They don't break down, and they're very cheap compared to the West. Western semiconductors are very, very expensive, and also Western semiconductors come with a lot of baggage. If you're a sanctioned country, you cannot buy them, and if you can buy them, you have to, you're basically under Americans' thumbs. Basically, they will give you a big list of rules and regulations you have to follow, and if you don't, they don't sell you it. So you're basically a slave if you buy these American products. And America doesn't really like selling high-end goods to global south, because they don't want the global south to develop like the West. So they're very, very extremely stingy when it comes to selling the high-end stuff. And this is why they're extremely angry at China, because China, they loved China at one point when China was making low-end goods, like when China was making, t-shirts and socks and underwear. In the beginning, in the 1980s, all the companies like Nike and Adidas, Puma, they all set up factories in China, and China was making all these, garments and, clothes and low-end manufacturing goods, basically low-end. And the West loved China for it. They thought, yeah, let's move all of our factories to China, let them make all the low-end goods. We'll leave all the high-end manufacturing in the West. We're not going to do a technology transfer, so we're just going to let China do all the low-end stuff. And all the companies decided to move all the factories to China to obviously save money, because it's cheaper to make in China. And it's backfired, because China has developed, and now they're making their own, not only low-end manufacturing goods, but also high-end manufacturing goods as well. And there is a saying that there's I think it's called the middle income trap, where most countries, when they start doing manufacturing, they get stuck in. So they basically get stuck in a cycle doing low-end manufacturing. They cannot do the high-end stuff, because they're basically stuck in the middle income gap. And they're stuck because they don't have their supply chains, or they don't have the technology, or they don't have the skills, and they're basically stuck in this low-end manufacturing goods cycle, and they cannot increase it to the high-end stuff. But China's overcome that. China's one of the first countries who has overcome the middle income gap, or the trap is called. And now they're making high-end goods, and they are competing with Western products with their high-end products. And the products coming from China are much, much cheaper and better quality as well. So the West hates it, America hates it, Europeans hate it, because they are losing market share to China, and they don't want that. So going back to this story, so China is obviously doing the 7 nanometers, which are going in mass production, and they are going into, like I said before, high-end Huawei chips. And China is not far behind from the West. I think TSMC is doing 3 nanometers or even 2 nanometers at the moment. But at the end of the day, it's not the size of the nanometer that counts. It's the whole product itself. The Chinese chips have one or more chips joined together, which where they basically cluster those chips together and put and the combined power of both chips, sometimes 3 chips, combined power of all the chips, is much better than the 2 nanometers one. However, in terms of power, it obviously uses more power because you have one or more chips put together. But China is step by step, they are getting closer and closer to the West. End of the day, they have produced their own DUV machines, which are going through testing, I believe. But it's only a matter of time before China comes out with its own EUV machine. And when they do develop their own EUV machines, then it's all over, guys. It's all over for the West. That means China can produce its own high-end, 2 nanometers, 1 nanometers chip. They don't need to do any more stacking. They can do it by themselves. And this is the last piece of technology that the West has, which has been hoarding from the rest of the world. But if China can crack that piece of technology, that will be the last piece of technology that the West has control over from the rest of the world. And there's nothing else that China needs from the West. The EUV machine is the last kind of last frontier, basically. But China is catching up. It's just a matter of time, guys, because China had, has got huge amounts of extremely clever engineers, huge amounts of really clever engineers graduating every single year, and they're joining top companies, plus also engineers from other countries. Even TSMC are joining China as well, sharing that knowledge. So it's only a matter of time, guys, before China comes out with its own EUV machines, which are locally produced as well. They don't need the supply chains that ASML uses. The reason ASML products are so expensive is because of the supply chains. They buy them, they buy so many different parts. I believe it's got 10,000 different parts, those EUV machines, and they buy them from all different parts of the world. They get certain products from the Middle East. They need neon gas, they need the lasers, they need the mirrors. There's so many components that goes into the EUV machines, and the reason it's expensive is because they all have to be shipped across different parts of the world, and if there's one blockage in the Hormuz Strait, for example, it puts their manufacturing behind by months and months, and it causes huge problems. But if China can figure out all of this in-house and do it all locally, then it's absolutely game over. They can save huge amounts of costs. They don't have to pay huge amounts for transport costs and supply chains, and rely on other countries. They can all do it in-house, and that means the costs will be significantly gone down. Rather than selling $400 million, I believe China can sell these machines to the global south and other countries for a tenth of that price, maybe even 40 million. That's just a guess, by the way. Anyway, I'll put an end to the video here, guys. Make sure if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe. Watch the video to the end. Really helps. And if you've got any friends, get them to move across to the new channel. That'll be really helpful as well. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.